Something new with you today. It's called our Wednesday Q&A, and it is as simple as the name there. We're just going to be spending a little bit of time on Wednesdays answering questions, and those questions will come from our sermon on Sunday. So in our bulletins, you will see on Sunday a number to text to ask questions. So as you're listening to the message and maybe something comes to mind, you say, I'd like to know a little bit more about that. You can text a question to that number that we're providing. We'll have it in the bulletin and on the screen. And we look forward to some time to be able to share some feedback and answers to those questions on Wednesday. We'll take some time to answer one or two of them in this format. I want to start our Q&A Wednesday here with a question that came in this week. And since we didn't have it up and running yet, I did get a question, but it was just in the form of someone coming up and asking. And I thought it was a great one, and I'll share it here with you. The question was this: how was neglecting Sabbath related to the Babylonian captivity? So if you remember, if you're with us in the message, I shared that as God is introducing the Sabbath to the people, that they were required to keep it under the Old Testament law, and that there was a relation to the amount of time they spent in captivity and to their time that they didn't keep the Sabbath. Well, I want to share just a little bit about that here in our few moments here together, and why that might be a place that we can learn a lesson. Well, one of the things that we understand about God's people in the Old Testament is they had a really hard time keeping God's law. And we understand that as a part of human nature and why we really ultimately need a savior. Well, they struggled with that. And there was a time frame in the time of people of Israel where for 490 years, they did not keep the Sabbath as God had commanded them to. When God institutes creation, we learned about this on Sunday, is that he put into place a 7-day week, 6 days of creation, 1 day to rest. And that's built into the rhythm of creation. In fact, the 7-day week is the only part of the calendar that isn't related to the moon's phases or the Earth's rotation around the sun. You'll hear more about that in your video study this week in your groups. The week, though, the 7-day week is just something that's a part of culture. It's a part of our world, and that's because it's part of the rhythm of life. And you'll find out also in the video that was the 10-day work week was tried during the French Revolution. That didn't go well. People got physically ill over that, mentally ill over it. So they went back quickly to the 7-day week. Well, God didn't just institute a 7-day week. He also instituted a 7-year week, in which he told the children of Israel, I want you to rest on the seventh day, but I also want you to rest on the seventh year. In fact, I want you to let the land rest. And for those of you who have done farming and understand how agriculture works, you know you have to let the land rest sometimes. And God says, I want you to do this every seventh year, and I want you to depend on me. Save the food in stores, but depend on me that I'm going to provide for you. And in Leviticus chapter 26, we hear some warnings about what God's going to do if they don't follow that command. And he says in Leviticus 26, then at last the land will enjoy its neglected Sabbath years as it lies desolate while you are in exile in the land of your enemies. So what God says is, if you don't keep this law, if you're not faithful to this, you're going to be exiled from the land, and the land will rest itself while you're away. He says, then the land will finally rest and enjoy the Sabbath it missed. As long as the land lies in ruins, it will enjoy the rest you never allowed it to take every seventh year while you lived in it. And down in verse 43, it says, for the land must be abandoned to enjoy its years of Sabbath rest as it lies deserted. At last, the people will pay for their sins, for they have continually rejected my regulations and despised my decrees. So it's not just that they're not keeping Sabbath. If this is going to happen, well, it's going to be connected to just an overall neglecting of God's law and the listening to him for the guidance for life. And so what is implied here is that for every year that the people neglect this law, the land is going to have to rest and recover itself. So what it implies is that later, as the land of Israel uh, did not celebrate this sabbatical year, it would be sent into captivity for that amount of time for recovery. And what happens is they go into captivity after Egypt. They're in the land for about 800 years in the promised land, but they're going to go into captivity for 70. That means that there are 70 years worth of Sabbaths that they did not keep. So let's come over here to the board. We'll do a little bit of math together. All right. So 70 years that they're going to go into captivity. Now, every 70 or every 7 years, or sorry, every 6 years, there's a seventh year where there's a year that they haven't kept. So that means that it's 70 times 7 years that they didn't keep the Sabbath, which comes to 490. 490 years they didn't keep that seventh year practice. And if you count backwards from the time of the end of their Babylonian captivity, remember when Zerubbabel and Ezra and Nehemiah come back and they rebuild Jerusalem. If you count backwards 490 years back to when this problem would have started, it would have been right about the time that a guy named Solomon became king. Now, this guy was supposed to be really wise, and he certainly was, but he also made some bonehead decisions as well with wives and things. But do you remember one thing that Solomon was all about? He said, I'm going to go out and I'm going to see what this world has to offer. And so he built and he built and he built, and he used a whole lot of labor to do that. In fact, his son comes along and they advise his son Rehoboam, hey, when you get up in front of the people, tell them you're not going to drive them as hard as your dad did, because they were working for him like crazy to build all of his gardens and all of these buildings and structures and all of the things that they were doing for him. And so I mean, he doesn't take that advice. But the point is that apparently what happened, the reason they quit keeping the Sabbath, now this is something I'm surmising, but something that's generally believed, I'm surmising about Solomon, but I think it's generally thought of is that it just wasn't economically smart to not work for 1 year, right? At least in their minds. And so they neglect this law of God's and they pay the price for it. Because God says, if you do this, you will be exiled from the land, and the land itself will rest while you are away. So in Jeremiah, we find out that he has warned these people. The Babylonians come, and Jeremiah starts to warn. He's like, guys, get back to the Lord. Commit to Him again, and they don't. And sure enough, for 7 years, they go away into captivity, and they pay the price for not keeping the Sabbath. But not just not keeping the Sabbath, but not keeping God's laws in general. And that's where we learn our lesson from something like this. Because the Sabbath certainly is for man. It is for the sake of man stopping and resting. But it's also to understand that we depend on God, right? And if we reject that, if we say, I got to work 7 days a week, there's no way that I can live life and supply for myself unless I work 7 days. And what the people were saying to God was, there's no way we can take a seventh year off. You can't provide for us. We have to provide for ourselves. What we're really saying is, God, we really don't need you. And so no wonder there was a harsh penalty for the people when they said to God, we got this on our own. This is really the original sin of man. It's pride. And so what we do is we say to God, God, we want to live in the rhythms that you have provided for us. And we want to honor that because you are provider. Thank you for the ability to work. Thank you for the ability to use my hands and my talents that you've given me. At the end of the day, I'm going to rest in you because you're provider of all things. So I hope that's at least a little more thorough of an answer there for you on this topic. And this is what we'll be doing each week. If you have questions, again, about the message, things that are shared on Sunday, feel free to text those in at the number that we'll provide, and we'll talk about them on Wednesday Q&As. But thanks again for joining me. And remember, as we are practicing the way of Jesus, let's be present where we are. Be where your feet are. Have a great day.